Order. Welcome to this oral evidence session of the Education Select Committee. This is an accountability session this morning with the Secretary of State for Education and the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Education. Thank you both for making the time to be with us today. We're really grateful. I'm going to invite, first of all, any members who would like to make declarations of interest to do so. Peter.
I'm the Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Groups on Schools Learning Assessment, Social Mobility and Classics.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca?
I'm a serving Surrey County Councillor.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite the Secretary of State to make an opening statement if you'd like to. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, Committee. You'll forgive me, I've got a bit of a bad throat this morning, unfortunately, so please bear with me if I just need to cough occasionally, so apologies in advance, Chair. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning. Before I go on, I know that you and the committee will want to hear that this government will very soon be making a full apology on behalf of the state to all of those affected by historic forced adoption in England. The Prime Minister will have more to say on this shameful period in our history, reflecting the gravity of what has happened. But here and now, let me say to all of those affected, you will get the apology that you so profoundly deserve. And I'm grateful to the committee for all of your work in this area. Chair, since we last met, I've got on with delivering our opportunity mission. My focus has been lifting the life chances of every child and breaking the link between background and success. I'm sure we'll cover all of the detail of that this morning, but I just wanted to briefly highlight some of the progress of which I'm most proud. At the top of that list is ending the 2-child limit, and in fact all of the work that we're doing around child poverty. 1,200 free breakfast clubs already up and running, and preparations underway for 500,000 more children to get a free school meal every day. Chair, you'll know that early years has always been a priority for me, so I'm delighted that 500,000 children are now benefiting from the rollout of early years entitlements. And young families across the country are already getting early support from the 200 Best Start family hubs that we've opened. In children's social care, I'm reforming the system and delivering 10,000 more foster places by 2029. In schools, I'm bringing together inclusion and high standards, fixing historic inequalities so that every child can achieve and thrive. On SEND, I'm taking responsibility, giving children the rights that they deserve, to go to their local school, to succeed in the classroom and to live a full life. On skills, I'm building a high-quality system to sit alongside the academic route, with 29 new technical excellence colleges in place and with V-levels launching in under 15 months from now. Chair, we want to deliver better childhoods for our children, but we must accept that childhood is changing. And to build an education system that works for every child into the 2030s, our action must stretch from birth to workplace. And that's why I'm working with families and with partners across nurseries, schools, colleges and universities to deliver both the most radical and the most consequential agenda for education and living memory. To see that starting to become a reality, to know the difference it's already making to the lives of children across our country, Chair, that is a special privilege, and I'm delighted to be here with you today to discuss the progress that we've made.
Thank you very much indeed. Permanent Secretary, would you like to say anything by way of introduction?
No, I'm absolutely fine.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Secretary of State, for your response that we've received recently to our report on SEND. We're grateful for the response. One of the recommendations that the government has rejected in our report is the recommendation to extend the local government ombudsman's remit to cover complaints about the delivery of inclusive SEND provision. You will know that the local government ombudsman currently has a remit over some schools, local authority schools, but not all schools. Mm-hmm. So there is an accountability inconsistency and gap in parts of our education system, and we highlighted that accountability overall is unevenly distributed within the SEND system currently, and that there's a need to address that. That recommendation had strong support from the sector. I wanted to ask, given the well-documented strain on current accountability and the inconsistencies, how can the department be confident that the current system and the proposed changes that you want to make will have the capacity and expertise to manage the additional pressures that will come from the proposed reforms?
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee and all the members for your work in this area and for the report that you published that allowed us to consider, ahead of launching the full consultation and the white paper, all of the areas of interest that you had identified, but also all of the work that you've done with parents to understand their frustrations about this important point around accountability. Whilst we didn't accept the recommendation of the committee, it is fair to say that through the consultation process, this has emerged as a key theme where parents are seeking continued assurance that children's rights will be well understood, that accountability and the right outcomes for children will be delivered. So I know it's a key area for parents, and when I said that the consultation that we were launching was a genuine one, I meant it. And we'll be reflecting very seriously on all of the areas where parents have identified what they perceive to be gaps within the current system. I think given the level of trust that parents have at the moment, given the failures, the problems that we have all experienced as members of Parliament, I do understand the nervousness that parents will feel, but I do believe the vision that we have set out around a system that is more inclusive, that will allow for more children to be able to go to their local school with their friends, achieving better outcomes, is the right vision. But I appreciate that this will have to take place over time with the transition from where we are now into that new system. And I think this is, again, a key theme that emerges both from your report and from our engagement with parents, which is a sense of urgency about making change happen now and a nervousness about bigger reform and what that will mean. But we aren't waiting to deliver those changes, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about all of the investment that's going in upfront right now to move the system into a better place that we identify need much earlier than is the case at the moment.
And I think what we hear from parents is not that they don't believe that the system can be better, but that they live in a reality where no system will ever get things right 100% of the time, and their concern is not that whether things can get better or not, it's that they have got robust backstop and robust access to redress when it goes wrong, because it will sometimes, because no system is ever perfect. So are you saying that you are looking again at the accountability proposals, and that parents could take some comfort from that at this point?
I've been clear that on every aspect of what we set out in the consultation, we wanted to hear the views from parents, from teachers, from experts about how we make sure we get that system right. I am clear that we need a system that protects and actually strengthens children's rights, and I do think through the delivery of individual support plans that will see a broadening of rights to a much bigger group of children than is the case right now. But I do recognise the importance of redress, of opportunities to put things right where things do go wrong. But I think over time, what we want to see is a reduction in that adversarial system that too many parents experience at the moment. And I think, when we look to the evidence of what happened in the past, particularly around Sure Start, where we saw better earlier identification of need, that didn't necessarily translate into what were then statements, because we'd met that need sooner. And that is very much the driving principle behind the additional support that's going into Best Start family hubs, with every family hub having a trained SEND professional. Because if we can identify needs sooner, if we can meet that need, including within mainstream schools, then over time we will no longer be in such a strained position between parents, between teachers and schools. And I've also heard through the consultation from education staff the importance for them of making sure we end up in that we move to a better place where some of this can be resolved through the development of those plans, where parents have input, where parents are heard, but where also education staff, led by the evidence, can put in place the right level of support to make sure that children can achieve all that they're capable of.
And the argument that we made in our report, it was precisely that it would be possible to bring down the numbers of children seeking EHCPs and the number of cases going to the tribunal, but that's a completely different argument from removing the important protections that are there. You want fewer people to be having to rely on those protections. It doesn't make the protections any less important to exist.
Sure. Obviously, the tribunal will continue to exist within the system that we've set out. EHCPs will remain an important function of the system, and we might come on to talk about our plans around specialist provision packages, the independent expert panel that I've appointed with Tom Rees and Dr Anne Gordon co-chairing that work, because even where it comes to EHCPs, there is too much variation in terms of what is available to children. And the fact that it can often be difficult as children move between areas, as you will doubtless have heard, to make sure that's digital, updated more frequently and best informed by the evidence is important. But there will remain that backstop of the tribunal, that will still be in the feature of the system. But of course, the current system remains in place until we move beyond the point of transition. So, you know, first changes not flowing through until 2029 as we move into a system in 2030. So we do have the time and the space, not just to invest up front as we're doing, but also to make that big, deeper cultural change, I think, in how we support children and families. And we're working also, I should say, very closely with health colleagues on this. I know this has also been an area that the committee's been concerned about in terms of health engagement. And I was delighted that the new Secretary of State for Health and Social Care came in, I think, his first couple of days in the job to meet directly with parents, with some of our key stakeholders, to hear what they wanted to see from health, and working closely with education services to deliver really strong outcomes for children.
Thank you. And on that theme, we'll go to Jess for the next question.
Nicely following on, your department has rejected the proposal to give the SEND Tribunal binding powers over health services, despite acknowledging that integrated care boards do not consistently act on its recommendations. Given that known failure to comply, why has the department chosen not to close what is clearly a huge accountability gap?
I think it's both a question of the accountability gap, plus I think often the failure to deliver even where things have been set out for children. I recognise the challenge there. It is why we have been working incredibly closely with health colleagues, including the new Secretary of State, but from long since. And it's why, you know, in terms of the development of specialist provision packages, we've got a health co-chair to recognise the need for health and education to work closely alongside the wider panel, supporting that work. Health's view would be that it would be unusual to make that distinction here around mandating the delivery of health provision in a way that you would not do in other areas beyond the provision of special educational needs. That would be the position that they would present if they were in front of the committee this morning.
Thank you. We'll go to Manuela.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary of State. So we know that under the reforms, the SEND tribunals will not be able to name a specific placement or setting anymore, and this is problematic. So can you tell us how will disputes over the naming of a setting be resolved, and what will compel local authorities to reconsider decisions on support, on placements, when the tribunals refer the case back to them?
So what we've heard from many people, including from specialist provision and special schools, is that sometimes the tribunal would be naming a school place in a setting, even when that school is heavily oversubscribed and where they don't feel they're safely able to deliver that provision. And that presents a problem for the school as well as for the parents in seeking to resolve that. I also believe there has to be a stronger role for local authorities in managing and delivering specialist provision within their local area, both through the delivery of more inclusion bases within schools, more specialist provision in schools, and making sure they've got the specialist provision in place that is necessary. But as I was referring to at the start, Chair, there are a number of themes that have emerged through the consultation, this being one of them, where we do want to look carefully at making sure local authorities are upholding their responsibilities and that children do get the places that they need. And it is a big feature of our wider work as a department at the moment to hold local authorities to account for the work that they're doing. They are receiving significant investment from government to deliver the places, the support, whether that's through experts at hand, through capital programmes. And I appreciate that there are huge variations in terms of local government performance. Some local authorities, and some I've visited, doing fantastic work with a clear plan for SEND delivery, with a clear plan to support children and young people. Others, where I've heard really quite harrowing tales from parents about significant failure. And it is a big, big feature of this department's work around accountability at local authority level, but also the questions that we've talked about in terms of accountability, making sure that at an individual child level, the support is put in place more quickly than happens at the moment. It's why I've also appointed Sir Kevin Collins as my delivery advisor, working with local authorities on these important questions, including around SEND. But there is more work to do, and I think we all recognise this as constituency MPs.
Just to follow up on that, I think the question's quite specific and the concern from parents is quite specific, that at the moment under the proposals, so notwithstanding that the reforms might lead to fewer incidences of dispute and conflict, and everybody wants that to be the case. We want better outcomes first time around, and better conversations and engagement with parents. But at the moment, under the reforms as they currently stand, a parent who is disputing the school place that the local authority has named, where the tribunal agrees with the parent that that is the wrong school place for the child, will be sent back to the same local authority that made that original decision to try to negotiate something different. And I think everybody is struggling to understand exactly how that will work in practice and how those disputes will be resolved. So could you answer on that specific point?
I do understand the point, and as I said at the start, when I said this was a genuine consultation, I meant it, and I do want to consider the views and concerns of parents. But I think there is also an important principle underpinning some of this as well, which is, as I just said to Manuela Pertigella, that often we will see settings named through that process where there are not places, or sometimes where it is not always the right provision for a child. And we do need to make sure that we have the right kinds of places in terms of places within settings in the right local areas. And that's what we're working to deliver at the moment.
Thank you. We'll go to Peter for the next question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Secretary of State, we, as you know, as a committee called for a ban on under-16s on social media, and it was really good to see that being announced. But one of the potential challenges that's been identified there is that, of course, this government is also committed to delivering votes to 16 and 17-year-olds, and concerns have been raised about a cliff edge. I think everyone is very concerned about the level of misinformation online. When I ran a local survey with over 500 respondents on social media, over 75% of respondents told me that the most alarming content they saw was misinformation, including under 18s, it being the largest issue that they identified. So what steps are you taking to make sure that when we are empowering young people with the franchise, we're also empowering them with the skills needed to make informed democratic decisions and spot mis and disinformation online?
Yeah, it's a really big and important area. I mean, I do believe the approach that we're taking and what was announced this week is the right one for children under 16, giving children their childhoods back and protecting them from some of the most damaging content that they will see online. But I do recognise that many young people at the moment will access not just some of the mis and disinformation and sometimes just some of the slop that they might see on some of those platforms, but that they will also access other, good news output on some of those platforms too. And it is important to make sure that there is kind of good content available for young people. Of course, they will still be able to access the internet in this world, and will still be able to engage with news and current affairs with their parents and with their family. But I do also agree that education has an important role to play in all of this, which is why, coming out of the curriculum and assessment review, we are committed to making citizenship a new statutory requirement for key stages 1 and 2, focusing on the things that will be most important around young people understanding both their rights and their responsibilities within the modern world, alongside wider changes that we're bringing through around media literacy, around being able to discern and challenge what you see in front of you through revisions to the RSHE curriculum. But this is an area that will continue to need further development. This is a big change that we're delivering in terms of citizenship education for our youngest children. But of course, we're also going through the process as we update the programmes of study for the new national curriculum of looking at further changes to the GCSE and the subject too.
Yeah, so I think you touched there on a really important point. I think it's fair to say that there are a range of approaches to teaching citizenship in schools at present, and some schools are doing it fantastically and embedding it across subjects and making it a really important part of their school. Others perhaps teaching it in a more cursory way. So what work are you doing to make sure that we're not just having citizenship embedded at all schools and colleges, but we're having good embedded cross-curriculum teaching of citizenship so that we can meet this moment?
There are examples, as you say, of schools that do this really well and other schools where they find it more of a challenge. And of course, we're continuing to keep under review what more we need to do by way of teacher training and support, also the materials that we make available as a department. As you say, that there are both the kind of embedding those approaches across our schools, which many will do anyway through the teaching of British values, for example, but also updating the programme of study for right across both the primary and the secondary curriculum to make sure that all young people are able to be curious, engaged citizens, especially as we move towards those young people being able to vote at 16.
And just very quickly, finally, Scotland and Wales already, of course, have votes at 16. What lessons have you learned from what support has been extended in Scotland and Wales?
We are keen to understand the impact that we have seen there, and MHCLG colleagues are also leading some of the work connected to this, about how we make sure that young people are registered to vote ahead of time. So the practical challenges as well as some of the areas of further development. But I don't know, Susan, if that's something you've discussed with your counterparts.
Yes. So we have conversations with counterparts in Scotland and Wales about the work that they've done on lowering the voting age. We've actually looked wide around the world as well, so countries like Austria and Malta that have successfully lowered the voting age to 16, and there's some really interesting evidence, including around the fact that those who vote at a younger age are more likely to continue to vote as they get older. So if you can engage people early, that's important. And I think there's both the kind of curricular content, there's also something about active citizenship and opportunity to take part, which again we're thinking about very carefully as part of the curriculum reforms, and we'll continue to work in a really evidence-based way on this. So again, some of the evidence isn't necessarily what people would assume. So if you look at something like media literacy, some types of media literacy learning and training are much better evidence than others. Some perform less well than the equivalent amount of time spent on literacy and numeracy and helping people distinguish fact from fiction, for example. So you just have to be quite careful about how you fit the right thing into the curriculum. As
an ex-classics teacher, you don't need to convince me that sometimes the way that you teach people to develop skills in the modern world doesn't have to be looking at the modern world, but there you go.
Thanks, Peter. Caroline, next question.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So I'd like to move on to talk about mobile phones in schools. This committee heard evidence during its inquiry into screen time and social media that although the 2026 Act makes the guidance statutory, there is a risk that the policy of never seen, never used, seen or heard could still be pursued by heads and teachers. So I'd like to ask you whether you consider that never used, seen or heard consistent with your expectation of mobile phone free environments?
I think every approach that schools adopt, whether in that case or in any other, has to be backed up by strong enforcement. Every policy is only as good as the enforcement and consistency that follows. And we have put the guidance on a statutory footing. I am clear that children should not have access to their phones during the school day. They should not be disrupting the child's education. They should not be disrupting classroom teaching, and that does extend to break times, lunch times, because I want children to be focused on, at those moments, spending time with their friends, eating their lunch, not worried about a phone buzzing or worried about what's going on elsewhere. So this guidance will become statutory from September. We've also made clear that we expect Ofsted to ensure that schools are upholding this. But alongside that, it is my belief that the vast majority of schools are doing this well. Where they are not, Ofsted will ensure that action is taken to prevent children from using phones in a way that disrupts their education. I think there is also a question around the rightful autonomy of head teachers and making decisions about what is right and best for their setting. I've visited schools that use pouches, I've visited schools that use lockers, I've visited schools that insist that smartphones cannot be brought into school. There are different approaches, and I think it is also important to allow head teachers some flexibility in decision making in responding to what works best for their setting. I should also add, because sometimes this can be a source of some misunderstanding, that of course school leaders do have the power to make exceptions where this relates to, for example, the use of health devices. And I appreciate sometimes when I talk about children not having access to phones, that can raise concerns amongst parents of children that may, for example, be diabetic and require access to a phone in order to regulate. So I just wanted to add that at the end for the avoidance of any doubt.
That's very important. Okay, so you talk about children not having access to phones, yet you haven't specifically said that the not seen, not heard policy doesn't work. And we've all heard evidence. I regularly hear from parents who say, we know it doesn't work because we know the kids are going to the toilet and using the phone in the toilet and using the phone at lunchtime. And it's quite a big ask for a teenager to say you can have your phone down there in your bag beside you, but you're never allowed to look at it. I mean, for most of us, for a whole day, that would be quite hard. So it seems slightly disingenuous to expect a teenager to be able to do that. So can I just push you? Do you think that not seen, not heard is an acceptable, workable, suitable policy? Or do you think that head teachers should move beyond that and actually have policies that require the phone to be removed from the child when they come into school and given back at the end of the day, or not brought in at all?
I think it's better for children not to have the distraction, and I appreciate it is a distraction if you have a phone in your blazer and it's buzzing away. That is undoubtedly a distraction. But I do think it is important that school leaders continue to have flexibility to respond best to their context. So many schools do not, for example, have, or choose not to, for good reason, to spend vast amounts of money on expensive pouches, although some choose that and they work well, but this is a commercial enterprise, let's be clear. Equally, some schools may not have room for lockers. That's why that school may insist that smartphones are just not allowed, and that's an approach that many have taken. But you know, I don't think I should be in the business of micromanaging individual decision making by school leaders, and so long as phones are not causing disruption, so long as there is clear enforcement, then I think that's what matters most. And look, I think it's part of the same challenge around under 16s and social media. As the Prime Minister made clear, we are not going to be in a position where no under 16-year-old ever gets on social media. Like, with the best will in the world, kids can be quite devious, and we'll try and get around rules that adults will set. Smoking was banned in the toilets when I was at school. There were plenty of girls in there at lunchtime having a tab. Yeah. So, but then the enforcement has to follow. That's the point. So I think we have moved to a strong position on phones in schools. I think there is genuine agreement across the political parties about the challenges that come of mobile phone use in school and beyond school, although we have responded to what school leaders have told all of us, that actually they can manage a lot of that challenge within their setting. What they found harder to control was everything that went on when children returned home and were sat in their bedrooms for hours, often seeing material that, you know, is not appropriate for young people.
You're not going to update the guidance on not seen, not heard?
We continue to keep the guidance under review, but we're putting it on a statutory footing from September, and I think that sends a very clear message to school leaders. I've actually seen, various letters have been shared with me that school leaders have issued to their schools following the updating of the guidance previously, and then subsequently when it was put on a statutory footing. Many school leaders have prayed in aid the department's guidance in making very clear that they are taking a firmer and tougher approach around the use of phones. Sometimes this can have a lead-in time, so I'm, for example, aware of one area where it was from September that they're saying there are no smartphones from this point, so as not to make changes to existing children within the school, but where parents are sending their children there, they have clear expectations about what they should be doing as parents. And parents have to try and play their part too.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on now to talk about falling school roles. The falling birth rate and how that's affecting school roles. So the National Audit Office's report on changing demand for school places states that your department has not assessed the impact of those changes on educational quality for pupils. Could you tell us why you haven't done so?
Excuse me. Susan, could you start off just in talking about, because some of this has the NAO considered not just more recent times, but looked at some of the history around all of this, if you wouldn't mind, and I will then supplement. I'll just have a drink of water, apologies.
Thank you. So in the Education Estate Strategy, which we published in the spring, we committed to developing a decision-making framework for mainstream schools to support them through demographic change. That overall, that kind of responsibility for shifting pupil numbers has traditionally sat and continues actually importantly in large part to sit with local authorities, and that is because they are best placed to make some of those decisions that are really close to again, these are often not about kind of aggregate numbers, they're about the kind of intimate geography of where people live, where housing is planned and so on. So we've got a national picture of falling roles, but we also have very wide variation within that, including quite local variation. In terms of the assessment of the effect on quality, when we look in general at numbers and quality, there's a long-standing tradition of education research around school size, class size, and most of the discussions about falling roles turn into one or other of those things in various ways. The evidence on school size is that who you have running and teaching in your school is massively more important than how big or small it is, and actually similar for class size. So very, very small classes, I mean under 10 to 15, appear to make some difference. Extremely large class sizes make some difference, over 60. Between that, it's very difficult to discern significant effect from class size itself, and the effect from teacher quality is much more significant. So the most important thing is that you're putting the best possible quality of teachers in front of children. Now, we don't think just to be clear, I'm not advocating for classes of 60. I don't think people would find that acceptable. There are lots of other pastoral reasons why you might not want to do that. But the most critical thing is that people are thinking and planning for how they put the best quality teachers in front of children in reasonably sized classes. But you don't see very much effect at the margin of the numbers. Overall, we're seeing class sizes, again, not very surprisingly, we're seeing class sizes come down as a result of the falling roles, and we're seeing pupil-teacher ratios come down as well. We do look at that again because we know that people want to understand that we're thinking about that. But at individual school and local authority level, what we want to do is give some better frameworks for supporting people to make really good decisions as roles fall, because we also understand that you get effects that are about marginal changes will suddenly have a kind of bigger effect if you go over the moment where you have been, for example, running a 2-form entry school, and actually your numbers of pupils are coming down to the point where it's going to become a 1-form entry school, and there's awkward moments in between of schools where they're kind of between what looks like a sensible set of class sizes. So we want to just support schools, and again, we've seen lots of schools take really sensible and thoughtful decisions about that, often different decisions that reflect their local circumstances. So we want to support that without setting a straitjacket or constraining the way schools can sensibly respond. We also, we also respond in the funding system by protecting schools against significant in-year change. So we have floors in the funding system that protect you as you change.
I was just going to add, in terms of the broader picture, there are both challenges and opportunities that come of what we're seeing at the moment. So there are challenges in terms of how local authorities manage this, how individual schools manage this. And, you know, Susan's just said, sometimes these are kind of very locality based and within communities within a local authority area where you can see some significant fluctuations, particularly where that might be in relation to housing development. So you could overall be in a situation where a local authority is seeing falling rolls overall, but you then may have a concentration of the need for primary places within one given community. We do have a birth rate at an historic low, and you know, these things can fluctuate. And you know, with the last time around when we went through this kind of cyclical moment, although this is more pronounced than previously, you have to be careful as to make decisions that aren't too hasty, given the cyclical nature of some of this, but also some of the opportunities that arise in the short and medium term. So that's why we're investing more capital into our school-based nurseries programme to use some of that space that's opened up to create more early years education. I've seen that where schools that did have a 2-form entry moving to 1 have now been able to open expanded early years provision, or actually expanded inclusion bases, which, you know, we set out through the white paper our intention that every secondary school and a commensurate number of primaries will have inclusion bases. And you know, I have the expectation, as we've set out as well through the education estate strategy, that schools will use that space well. But this is a challenge. This is undeniably a challenge where we as a department will have to work together with local authorities to understand both the bigger picture but also the quite localised scenarios that schools will experience on the ground.
Thank you. And do you have any plans to review the per pupil funding formula? Because obviously as the pupil numbers fall, it's going to have a significant effect and will disproportionately disadvantage already smaller schools.
We are and will continue to look at funding overall. As Susan has said, there are protections where schools experience sharp drops in pupil funding, and there are also protections in place for small rural schools as well, to recognise the distinct role that they will play. But again, there is a challenge there, because were we to continue for an extended period of time to fund schools beyond that, where the numbers had fallen significantly, quite rightly others in other parts of the country where they're seeing an increase and would say, well, hang on, there's a fairness point about how we manage that. There is a balance here, both in terms of how we deliver those protections, how we ensure that rural communities in particular have the necessary provision that is required, alongside the overall fairness across the education system, where it is a fair way of allocating funding, that the funding broadly follows the pupil, but that of course is not the only mechanism that is used to allocate funding to schools.
If a small rural school becomes unsustainable and is forced to close, and I have a couple of schools that are going down to one class for the whole school as from September, as soon as that school closes, the whole community changes and the social cohesion of the community changes, and the village becomes a very different place, and we're seeing that in parts of Devon and Cornwall. So you say there are protections for small rural schools. Is your department taking into account the wider social cohesion impact that would happen if a school was allowed to close, given that in 10 years' time there might be more kids and that a school might be needed?
Yeah, and that point about in 10 years' time the school might be needed is something that we have to be mindful of right across the system as we consider this, and local authorities again have to be mindful of taking a decision around closure when they know that there could be further housing development in the near future, and these are difficult decisions. They are difficult decisions across the board, but where it comes to rural schools, there is a presumption against the closure of all rural maintained schools, and that presumption against closure doesn't mean that rural schools will never close. Again, that would be there is a fairness, and there is a point there about how we make sure that is done in a way that works, but it does make sure that the case for closure is strong, that proposals are clearly in the best educational interests of the area, and maintained primary schools have additional protection through the rural designation order, which does require that certain bodies to be consulted prior to a decision on closure. So those protections, that provision does exist, so that we do take consideration as to the important role of rural schools. But some of this we will see elsewhere in the system as the years develop. Some parts of the country are further ahead in terms of some of these challenges, places like London, big urban centres, where there has been not just a significant change in population, but also a significant fall in the birth rate. And it's our job as a department to work closely with local authorities and others to manage that. But, this is, as I say, both a challenge in some ways, but I think also presents us with some opportunities as we consider how we embed early years education into our schools, but also how we make sure that there is strong special educational needs provision across all schools as well. And as local authorities take decisions perhaps in a rural context too, that matters too, because of course children in those communities will have additional needs and will need to access strong specialist provision. So these are careful balances. It's not always easy, I appreciate, but those protections do exist.
Thank you.
Just briefly on the role of local authorities, so it simply isn't the case that local authorities have had the jurisdiction that they have needed in over a majority of the education system to make decisions about pupil place planning. And I mean, we've seen examples of that. I've seen examples myself of schools that have academised in order to take themselves out of a pupil place planning process that might have resulted in the closure or merger of the school. And that's happened across the piece, and some local authorities have found it easier than others to marshal their academies who have control over their own decision-making processes and pupil place planning to cooperate in a authority-wide process or not. But it's been very chaotic, and it's been very, very frustrating and inadequate for lots of local authorities. Can you just say a bit about the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Act?
Yeah.
Does change the provision on that basis? What difference you expect that to make? But also, I am surprised to hear you say that local authorities have had control of this, because it simply isn't borne out in reality that they have until this point.
I think it's fair to say there is significant variation in terms of local authorities' responses and the extent to which they have been able to kind of convene and coordinate within their local area. I've seen local authorities where that's worked incredibly well, but I'm also aware of the problems that have arisen in some local authorities where there has been significant disagreement or conflict around the best way forward. These are rarely easy conversations to have, because they will often be quite deeply held views about the provision in one local area, the reluctance of parents or others to consider whether their children may need to travel further afield. And I understand that. We went through this process in Sunderland and some years ago when we were experiencing a falling rural situation around 2009. We then of course ended up 2014-15 with a significant expansion in the need for school places. Luckily, we did not take the decision at that point. The local authority did not take that decision to close significant numbers of schools, because had they done so, we would have ended up having to then recreate lots of the places. And that again is some of the difficulty that can arise, but where local authorities, I do believe, are best placed to understand some of the demographic change that may be developing, whether that's falling birth rate or expanding housing development. But on the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Act, this has introduced new measures to enable greater local collaboration on pupil admissions between local authorities and schools, including a measure to enable the school's adjudicator, in cases where they uphold an objection to a school's PAN, to specify what it should be. School quality and parental preference will be key considerations through that process, but we have introduced new duties for mainstream state schools and local authorities to cooperate. And I think the Act gives a clear message to all of those working in the system that we should be working together to address some of these challenges. As I say, that can work well. It hasn't always done so, but I think the Act gives us that clear framework for a better understanding of our shared responsibilities, department, local authorities, schools, trusts. This, whilst the most pronounced falls in the birth rate have been in parts of London, this is going to become an everywhere challenge.
There is just an important difference, I think, between a local authority being a decision maker because its schools are maintained schools, and that it can take those decisions in a democratically accountable way with the local community, and a local authority being a convener and persuader for schools that are academies and therefore not directly within its purview. And I just think it's important to be kind of realistic and accurate about how we describe those processes, because it has been extremely difficult, and it continues to be difficult for lots of local authorities to be navigating that process when they're not directly decision makers over the school places that are involved. But we will move on and go now to Manuela. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to focus on curriculum and assessment review, and in particular on vocational qualifications, because there have been numerous attempts to introduce various forms of vocational qualifications over the last few decades. And you intend to introduce V-levels. And given the succession of vocational qualifications created and then abolished since the 1980s, what evidence can you point to that the department's approach this time has learned from those lessons, and that the delivery of V-levels will succeed where others have failed?
I do believe it is important to address the very mixed landscape that we see in post-16 technical and vocational education, and the confusion that can often be there for parents, for young people, for employers, as to the nature of the qualification, what it means, what it will equip the young person with in terms of onward progression. And we've got some very clear and well-established academic routes. It's been more confused and more mixed on technical and vocational education, and it is essential that we have really high quality options for young people that want to pursue those routes, alongside a much stronger focus around apprenticeship opportunities for young people. And that's why we've taken the decision to refocus apprenticeships on young people, and where the numbers and the completions are starting to rise, which is really welcome. On V-levels, they'll be the same size as A-levels. They'll offer applied learning, can be taken alongside A-levels, recognising that some young people post-16 might not want to choose a T-level, which is more specified and more focused on a very intensive period of study of one area. So allowing young people to have that mix. But they will also be linked, V-levels will also be linked to occupational standards, to ensure that there is a closer join-up between what the young person is studying and what that will mean in terms of onward progression, in terms of employment. It has been mixed in the past, and that has led to not just confusion for employers and young people, but sometimes, sadly, young people studying for qualifications that have not equipped them as well as they ought to have, and a lack of clarity around the status and standing of that qualification. A-levels are a well understood qualification. T-levels are getting there, and I hope we will see that parity, and that parity does matter. And I think V-levels will be a welcome addition to the system that will allow young people to also study for really high quality technical and vocational courses that will equip them for what's needed. This is a process that, to your point about how we manage this, managing it well, the implementation, that is incredibly important. We've set out an implementation plan around this. We work closely with colleges and providers, because this is a big change. It is a fantastic chance to reshape how we're doing things. But of course, making sure that we work with colleges, providers, sixth forms and others to deliver these qualifications will also be the key test.
And you will have a program of communication, this new qualification to parents, to obviously not just as in school settings, but the parents and carers and the young people, because I think we found with T levels there wasn't we heard evidence that there was low retention rates, but also it wasn't communicated properly and so on. So will you be able to have a program of raising awareness of these new qualifications as well?
And that's why the implementation in its wider sense is incredibly important, so that yes, the communication, and we do lots of communication to parents and young people in terms of how the department makes sure we're getting those messages across, but also making sure that schools and colleges are able to provide high quality advice to young people about all of the routes and options that are out there. I've, as you will have done, visited many schools, many colleges where young people have said they weren't made aware of everything that was available. That's especially true, I think, where it comes to young people who wish to pursue an apprenticeship route, especially post-18, and feeling that they are advised that university is the only option, when of course it is a great option, but it is certainly not the only option.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jess.
Thank you. Ofqual told us in January that they cannot require nor rebuke exam boards for not offering certain qualifications. Daniel Gillings, as a 12-year-old, he's a constituent of mine, successfully campaigned to get the DFE to recognise BSL as a new GCSE. But at present, no exam board is offering British Sign Language, Romanian or Ukrainian GCSEs. Do you believe that Ofqual needs stronger powers to address this market failure?
On all three of those areas, those are areas that I have discussed with Ofqual and with exam boards. Exam boards would say that they have to be confident around the delivery and the scale of some of these programmes. I have impressed upon exam boards, awarding organisations, that the case that others are making. I do not have the power to compel them to act. Ofqual, of course, will regulate the system, but it is for individual awarding organisations to decide whether or not they wish to bring forward qualifications. And I'm sure your constituent will be making the case to all of those organisations as well about the importance of bringing it forward. And I do believe that bringing forward British Sign Language would be a welcome step.
Thank you. And following OCR's withdrawal of AS level classics, do you accept that leaving provision entirely to exam board viability risks narrowing the curriculum? Just at the time we're hoping to broaden it, and what steps will be taken to prevent the loss of strategically important subjects?
But I think across the board, in terms of strategically important subjects, and Peter Swallow might disagree that classics is perhaps not put into that category, although I'm sure we've made
depends on what you mean as strategically important.
Well, indeed, this is indeed that's the definitional challenge. If we're talking about some of, there are significant numbers of subjects that are exceptionally popular, where there are no challenges around for awarding organisations about what they are able to deliver because of the sheer volume of young people who wish to study those subjects. Of course, classics is not taught, sadly, in a huge number of schools, and I suspect that is part of the issue around the volume and number of students that wish to enter into those qualifications. But of course, we as a department will continue to work with Ofqual, with the awarding organisations, to make sure that young people have that range of high quality options, whether that's through A levels, V levels, T levels, level 2 reforms that we're delivering as well, to make sure that all of our qualifications are aligned to strong onward progression, whether that is into further study in the subject, onwards to university, or onwards to an apprenticeship.
I think this committee established in a previous evidence session that it would be possible for a new entrant to offer new subjects, that it didn't have to be one of the down to persuasion of one of the existing awarding bodies to do so. Is given the demand, I mean, there's really strong demand for BSL, also for Ukrainian and Romanian GCSEs because of the diaspora communities that have been growing in recent years. Is the department working proactively with those communities and those who are campaigning for those subjects to establish whether new entrants could come in to solve this problem, which is incredibly frustrating in this space?
We will continue to work with anyone with an interest in bringing forward important qualifications in the areas that you've just described, and certainly where it comes to a GCSE in Ukrainian, this is something that every time I meet with my Ukrainian counterpart or with representatives from the Ukrainian government, they raise consistently with me because they believe it is important that young people who are with us from Ukraine in this country should have the opportunity to study Ukrainian. I know similar calls are made around Romanian. I appreciate the case that's been made around British Sign Language as well, but yes, we will continue to keep this as an area where we do hope to see progress, and I understand the call of the Ukrainian government in this area. I do recognise it, but you know, it is not within my gift to bring forward that GCSE.
Thank you. We'll go to Serena next. Thanks.
We've heard evidence previously regarding concerns with the English curriculum that can undermine reading for pleasure, particularly around the volume of content and text that the Curriculum and Assessment Review did not address, and we're asking whether you will commit to looking at that again for the GCSE English curriculum.
So coming out of the Curriculum and Assessment Review, we are looking at all of the programmes of study that will give rise to the new GCSE qualifications, and we are taking account of those important questions whilst maintaining high standards within those subjects as well. In terms of reading for pleasure and the National Year of Reading, I know the committee is very interested in this area, and I'm really pleased that for the first time in I think 5 years we're starting to see progress in terms of an increase in the number of young people who are reading for pleasure. That is an important step forward. There is lots more to do, but I think through the National Year of Reading we do have an opportunity to really spread that joy and that passion really widely amongst young people. Of course, in order to become a confident reader, we need to get the basics right when children are young. And I think there is clear evidence to support the impact, for example, of phonics within our primary settings. But of course, I don't just want young people to be functional readers. I want them to find a passion, find what they enjoy, and as the National Year of Reading would say, go all in.
But specifically around the GCSE English curriculum and the volume of text, we welcome the move towards looking at the diversity of text. But it's the crowded curriculum that we've heard evidence that is an issue with the GCSE English curriculum.
No, I understand, and both here and right across the curriculum, this is an area that we are working through as part of the work arising out of the Curriculum and Assessment Review, working with experts in the field, expert drafters, supporting us to make sure that young people do have that breadth, whilst recognising the history in terms of whether that's Shakespeare or other authors that bring a richness and a breadth to what young people can experience. I do want to make sure that young people do enjoy a breadth where it comes to experiencing the full richness of all of the works that are out there. But there is a question of balance in all of these areas of curriculum about making sure that it is not overwhelming, that it is deliverable, and that we get the content right alongside working with teachers to make sure they're confident as we bring those changes forward.
Thank you. And regarding Year 8 reading tests, we've heard evidence that welcomes it will be a good opportunity to boost targeted support, but we've also heard concerns regarding teachers' workload and strain on pupils. So how can you give staff and pupils assurances that it won't create additional strain?
My expectation is that over time it will make the job of teachers easier, because if we identify young people who are struggling with their reading more quickly and put in place the right support, that will open up the whole of the curriculum to our young people. We know that not being a confident reader isn't just a barrier to enjoying English, it's a barrier to maths, it's a barrier to geography, it is a barrier to so many subjects. And we know that as young people, it is young people from our most disadvantaged backgrounds. And the big focus of the white paper was around white working class young people and the challenges that they will see in terms of attainment. And the reading test is designed to ensure that schools are identifying and putting in place support that young people need more quickly. Right now, it was a key theme that emerged actually from school leaders too, who've said that increasingly Key Stage 3 has become a lost time for many of our students. But ensuring that young people are confident and functional readers is a critical part of how we will make sure that they are set up to succeed, whatever they want to go on to do later on in life.
And it won't be a performance measure.
No, it will be a statutory test, but we want schools to use it to shape and inform how they support pupil progress.
Can I just ask why you didn't take Becky Francis's recommendation about the age at which the screening test should be introduced?
There were two areas that Professor Francis brought forward, both around English and maths. There is both a question, in terms of the question of where you do it. I think because we want schools to focus in Year 7 on improving reading, then into Year 8 is the time at which you would make that assessment. I know that Professor Francis also is keen that we make progress in maths, as am I, but to the question from Serena Breckenridge, there is a limit, I think, to what sometimes can be delivered, and wanting to take account of how we deliver within schools, what we ask of schools. And for me, reading is how we unlock for all young people the entire breadth of the curriculum.
Thank you. I will go to Darren next.
Chair. Secretary of State, we're all navigating the brave new world of AI and what the challenges and opportunities are of that. But we've had evidence that in education, there's no comprehensive framework to support schools in making those informed decisions about how to engage with AI platforms. Indeed, some have described it as the Wild West. So what are you and your department doing to make sure that schools don't feel left on their own to navigate this?
Both in terms of wider technology use by schools and AI, I think there are amazing benefits that we can deliver, both for young people in their education, but also for the workforce in terms of managing workload pressures, admin burdens, much more besides. But setting that direction from the centre is important. As you say, schools will have to make their own decisions about how they manage the use of technology. And technology for technology's sake cannot be and will never be the answer. And that's why we are setting kind of clear expectations around safety, around quality, around infrastructure, as AI develops, looking at questions around pedagogy, around how young people learn, around wanting to avoid some of the downsides that could arise from AI use, as well as recognising the benefits of technology. And that sits alongside and is a central part really of all of the changes around curriculum, around workforce, and much more. Now, we also have work that we've driven forward around the use of AI through OAK, through lesson planning. We often think about the use of technology and AI as being how we might support children to make progress, perhaps those who have been struggling, and that's an area where we've been doing a lot with DSIT. But actually in areas like lesson planning, marking, some of the admin issues that teachers and school leaders will experience, if we could free up more of their time to focus on what makes the biggest difference, which is that human interaction, that fantastic teacher at the front of the classroom, then that will make an enormous difference as well. But this is an area where things are moving very rapidly, where we as a department are also kind of wanting to get ahead of some of that to ensure that schools are making good, well-informed decisions about use of resources, but also what's most effective in terms of supporting children's learning, where, as you say, there is variation in terms of how schools will approach it.
I mean, no one's looking for a kind of a rigid diktat from the DFE, but can you confirm that you are at least working with schools to set out a set of broad principles to say what your finding is positive and what should perhaps be avoided because of the evidence of how it might undermine educational progress?
I mean, it's about safety, which is critical, but it's also about how children learn and wanting to make sure that that these are tools that are aids to support learning, that they don't replace the ways in which we know that children's brains will develop, that the way that their learning will take place, and wanting to avoid some of those challenges around cognitive offloading in particular.
So we've issued and then updated generative AI product safety standards for schools. So we have got those out there, and they don't just cover safety as in not letting bad people contact your children through your edtech systems. They also cover protections around cognitive, emotional and social development. They are a relatively high-level framework. They don't tell schools what edtech products to buy and what not to buy. They say these are the principles you should work at and the questions you should ask and the things you should check against. And we're also launching a call for evidence this month, launched on 7th of June, which looks at how screens are and should be used in the classroom, and that links to the work we did on guidance for parents on screen use by 5 to 16-year-olds at home. So we're looking at use of screens more broadly in the classroom. We've also got work going on partnering edtech firms and groups of schools to test AI tutoring tools, again announced by the Prime Minister. We haven't announced the partnerships yet, but that's coming very soon. And that is specifically designed to do that in a way that involves really detailed, close, both co-creation between the schools and the companies, and then really detailed evaluation so that we can see and understand the impacts and effects. There's a really big question underneath all of this, though, which is, again, if you look at educational systems around the world, there are lots of systems where they're much more dirigiste than we are about learning materials, for example, textbooks, and the pattern of learning in lessons. So there's lots of places around the world where they will have kind of centrally specified textbooks, for example, for classes. That's not been how we have run the education system here. We have set out a clear national curriculum, we've really encouraged the spread of good quality evidence about what works in education, but we've done that in a system where we've given more freedom to teachers and schools to make their own choices, to consult the evidence and then to feed that back into what they're doing. And I think we are, the work we're doing on EdTech sits in that framework. The challenge is getting really good quality evidence about what works on EdTech and AI products, which not only so the availability and the range of products changes very rapidly, but even within one product, the programming may change, the algorithms may shift, and you may be using something that's quite different from the thing that was tested even a few months ago. I think that presents us with a real challenge. And again, the reason we're doing, so the work that we're doing partnering companies and schools goes further than we would have done in a non-tech world, precisely because we're in a different context and we have to think about it in a different way. So we're trying to give schools, again, we've got those generative AI safety standards out there. They do cover things like cognitive offloading at that principled level, but we are looking at whether we need to go further and giving more support and guidance almost at the product level. But that's quite a big shift. It's not what we do in other parts of the system.
And less about product, but more about kind of educational processes and then assessment. Mm-hmm. What we've already heard that some AI platforms are already undermining assessments within education, particularly where you've got takeaway coursework assignments. They're done outside the classroom, and therefore there are questions about the integrity of the work and how the mark scheme fits to actually recognise what individual students are or potentially aren't doing. So again, do you have a concrete plan to think about how best you can respond to that challenge in a way which, again, makes sure everyone has the same understanding of the risks, because we don't want a postcode lottery on quality of assessments across the country? How are you going to be dealing with that as a department?
So this is an area where we also work with Ofqual, particularly considering issues such as on-screen assessment, where they have to ensure the integrity of the exam system. And there is, as you say, a growing desire, but also a growing desire to consider the use of on-screen assessment and technology, but in parallel, all of the challenges that you've just identified there around the nature of assessment. I think it brings into sharp focus the importance of exams within our system because of the growing challenges that we see around other forms of assessment and how they may, how the advancement in technology may present challenges to ensuring the integrity of non-exam based forms of assessment. But also given the big differences that exist between schools' capacity around both the use of technology and around ensuring the highest possible standards of cybersecurity, I can understand that Ofqual want to look very carefully at all of these areas. And that is something that I also share, that whilst I can see how it could well be desirable in certain subjects, the safeguards that we have within our system at the moment do allow for us to protect the integrity of the exams and qualification system, can give us confidence that the qualifications that young people are awarded are robust, and leave us less susceptible to some challenges that you might see when you start to introduce technology. Whilst there is amazing technology that presents lots of opportunities, there is also something very old-fashioned, but also rather useful about the traditional pen and paper where it comes to assessment and the ability for schools to make sure that there are no questions as to the integrity or safety of the exam system.
Just add one thing on non-examined assessment. You asked about assessment when people are taking work away. There are a couple of things on that. So in qualifications that combine examined and non-examined assessment, exam boards regulated by Ofqual will always look quite carefully at the work of pupils who appear to have done really significantly differently in their non-examined assessment from in their examined. So again, and they're used to, some pupils will find some of those things easier than others, but they're used to what a normal difference looks like, and they're quite good at identifying differences that look unusual, to put it that way. I think the other place where we often use non-examined assessment is where we're assessing more practical skills, so things like a performance in music. Across a lot of vocational qualifications, often what you're looking at is demonstration of a pupil's more practical work. And I think this is one of the places where actually AI gives us opportunities to think differently about this. So sometimes students are writing a portfolio to describe practical skills that they are developing. And the AI risk is that AI writes the portfolio. The AI opportunity is that you might actually be able to use AI to support more direct assessment of the skill. And so there's actually some quite interesting, and again, this is very early stage, but there's some quite interesting work going on with exam boards, with Ofquals, and indeed in thinking about V-levels and thinking about what does the best possible assessment of those more practical skills look like, and how do we move away from assuming that if you're assessing a practical skill, you immediately default to getting someone to write loads of stuff in a portfolio.
I think what's really exciting about the consultation that we've launched on the natural history GCSE is the strong fieldwork element of that. So 20 hours, minimum of 20 hours of fieldwork, which I believe, we've worked very closely with drafters to make sure that can be done in the school grounds, close to a school, not expensive field trips, but an area where there is a strong case for a non-exam assessment element, given the practical and hands-on nature of that qualification.
On tutoring, so we've certainly heard from organisations that deliver tutoring that much of the benefit is in the relationship with the tutor. And I just wondered, in seeking to roll out AI-based tutoring, whether you've explored that primary question of whether a machine is going to be able to deliver the same benefits as a human, with all of the advantage that you have a human who is taking a particular interest in you and your learning, which is especially important for some of the most disadvantaged pupils. Could you speak to the evidence?
Yeah, of course. Yes. So the first thing to say is the evidence for one-to-one tutoring, alongside really good quality classroom teaching and well integrated with the quality classroom teaching, is strong. You are right that some of the evidence around tutoring is about the interaction and that sense of somebody taking an interest in your work. And we are not testing AI tutoring because we expect the whole of education to be replaced by a bunch of robots. We think that the human connection remains spectacularly important, and in particular, we're specifically testing AI tutoring that is complementary to really good quality teacher-led classroom teaching. So we would not be expecting lots of students sitting in rows in the classroom just sort of interacting with their screen. This is about out of classrooms, things like homework support that support and complement what's going on in the classroom. We have seen some quite promising, and again it's very early stage, but some quite promising early stage evidence that both good quality AI tutors and good quality AI support for tutoring, again, that integrates the work that humans are doing, can have some, again, it looks like there are some early promising results, but we are not, what we're doing is we're testing some people who've got some promising products, and we're going to evaluate that incredibly carefully and thoughtfully and look at what works. And if it doesn't work, we won't do it, because that would be silly. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll go to Peter for the next question. Thanks.
Thank you. We've seen in recent years the devastating effect of safeguarding failings in early years.
Yeah.
And as part of our inquiry into early years, we've heard concerns about an operational gap between statutory intent and real-world practice. So what work are you doing to close this gap and strengthen safeguarding in early years?
This is an incredibly important area, and where we've seen some deeply distressing and really troubling incidents that you as a committee will all have heard as well. And I've met with many of the families who've been affected by this, and Liv Bailey, our Early Education Minister, has also been taking forward a lot of work in this area, engaging directly with parents, some of whom have lost children in the most awful of circumstances, or where children have been harmed or put at significant risk of harm when they entrusted their most cherished children to people that they thought were there to look after them. And it's a big step as a parent to leave a very small child in the care of others who are not your family, especially if those children cannot communicate and are not able to express what might have happened if they've been exposed to harm or to violence. And that's why we've been looking very carefully at areas such as CCTV in settings, hearing from parents' experiences of what has gone on, around safer sleep. And I want to pay tribute to the campaigners like John Meehan and Katie Wheeler, who have pushed us rightly to make sure that this is a much bigger feature of the guidance and the safeguarding standards around the EYFS framework. And there have been updates introduced around that. But we are considering what further steps are necessary, working with Ofsted and others, and working with the parents to hear their experiences, to make sure that when children are in early years settings, that we can have as much confidence as it is ever possible to have, that children are having happy, wonderful experiences, not without parents having to have any cause for concern. And we've been working with experts, particularly in these areas around CCTV, to make sure that we get the balance right, we avoid any unintended consequences, and where we consider the right approach to putting in place a strengthening of the approach around this.
And needless to say, I hope you'll look very closely at the recommendations of our report once it's published on that.
Of course, absolutely.
On a different but no less harrowing issue, I want to turn to historical forced adoptions, and I really recognise what you said in your opening statement. You said you will get an apology, which I think is the clearest and most definitive commitment that we've had up to now on that, and I want to thank you. But you'll also be aware that when the Education Committee published our report, building on the work of the Human Rights Committee, on which I also sit, we were clear about three things. Firstly, that an apology needed to happen at pace. Secondly, that it needed to be co-produced with the victim survivors. And thirdly, that it needed not just to be a standalone apology, but come alongside meaningful support, fully funded support. So I wanted to press you on those 3 points about timelines, about co-production, and about the meaningful support that might come alongside an apology.
No, I understand, and I'll seek to say as much as I can, but you'll appreciate there are some limitations. But I do want to firstly thank the committee and members for your work in this area. But most importantly of all, I want to thank all of the campaigners that have been working closely with us. The practices have caused deep and lasting harm, and as you will have heard, the powerful testimony of those affected, it is impossible to hear that testimony and not recognise the case for action. It is incredibly powerful that so many years on, the harm, the trauma and the experiences that people have stayed with them till this day. And as a government, we do acknowledge the role that the state had in these events. We can't change what happened, but we can seek to make sure that those affected and the campaigners understand that the state has acknowledged its role in what should never have taken place, what was a very painful period for the country, but most importantly of all, a very painful period for mothers, their children, and wider families. We will be looking very carefully in setting out next steps. We are in the process of engaging with campaigners on all of these important areas, and it is right, therefore, that the Prime Minister sets out further steps in this area. But I wanted to make clear at the committee here today that we do as a government recognise that not only should historic forced adoption never have happened, that the state did have a role to play in the trauma that so many people endured, that we take those experiences extremely seriously, and we will do whatever we can to put in place both the support and the apology that is long overdue.
I think there will be some frustration on the amount of time it's taken, not just under this government, but the amount of time it has taken many years to get to this point. But I do take what you've said today, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to turn now to child poverty. You co-chair the Child Poverty Task Force with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and I think there has been a degree of confidence because of that co-chairing that the government has been serious about the difficult and challenging nature of cross-departmental work that is necessary to tackle child poverty. You will know, because we've had an exchange of letters on the subject, that we are deeply disappointed and concerned that yourself and the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has declined our invitation to come before the joint inquiry of both committees to answer questions on the delivery of the Child Poverty Task Force. And we are left wondering whether this is about a deprioritisation of this work across government, and whether you are confident that junior ministers, with all respect to junior ministers, really have the clout that is needed to do the difficult work of cross-departmental delivery on this complicated and extremely important area of government policy.
I mean, there is certainly no question of deprioritisation. This has been a personal priority for me in co-chairing the work together with the predecessor Secretary of State Liz Kendall and now with Pat McFadden. And I am delighted that we are on course through the strategy to lift over 500,000 children out of poverty. I'm very proud of what the Labour government achieved last time around, but we're on course to surpass that. And there is more to do. There is always more to do, but I think that is real cause for celebration. And it was most effective because we were able to bring forward departments across government to consider, yes, important questions like social security, but also early years entitlement, transport, housing, all of the barriers and all of the challenges that young people in poverty experience growing up. We are establishing a new interministerial group on child poverty, and that will oversee the delivery of the strategy. And I continue to monitor that and have a very active and keen interest in driving that forward. It also, of course, is linked to so many other areas of the Department for Education's work, whether that's expanding early years entitlements, free school meals expansion, Best Start family hubs, new free breakfast clubs. There is a strong record in terms of the priority that this government attaches to child poverty. But this is not a job that is done. And I will not rest until all children in our country, regardless of background, have every opportunity to succeed, and where poverty does not blight the life chances of the sheer volume in terms of number of children that at the moment continue to endure avoidable poverty. And I can assure you and the committee that this remains a deep personal priority for me.
And our committee and the Work and Pensions Committee would be further reassured and would much prefer it if yourself and the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions were prepared to make good on those statements and come and be accountable for the delivery of the strategy in front of our joint committees. And we would be grateful if you could reconsider our request.
See what I can do.
Thank you very much. I will just want briefly to turn to another bit of unfinished business. I asked the Prime Minister when he appeared in front of the Liaison Committee in December 2025 about the issue of VAT and further education colleges and sixth form colleges. As you will know, this is an entirely unjustifiable loophole in the tax regulations that treats one part of the state education system different from another one. The Prime Minister said that he would go away and look at it, and he said he would talk to the Treasury about it. Has there been any progress on that issue?
The Prime Minister did give that commitment. This is also an area that I keep a keen interest in, and I can assure you I continue to discuss with colleagues in the Treasury the important case that has been made, that is well understood, that you have made, that the sector make. So whilst I'm not able to provide a further update in terms of progress or announcement, I can assure you I understand the case for this, and it's something that we continue to discuss with Treasury colleagues.
Thank you very much. I will go to Rebecca now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary of State, for being here, and Permanent Secretary. You pledged to recruit 6,500 teachers, yet you have excluded primary schools when measuring against that pledge. Why?
Because, as we set out in our manifesto, we will focus on shortage subjects, areas that face recruitment challenges, and where those teachers are needed most. And as we discussed earlier in the session, we are sadly seeing significant falling roles in primary. It would therefore be illogical, given the significant drop, tens of thousands of drop in terms of pupil numbers in primary, to prioritise primary school teacher recruitment at this point. And we are seeing significant progress against our target. We've now achieved over 70% of the 6,500 additional teachers that we need. And that sits alongside a backdrop of a very strong story around retention, the strongest retention numbers that we've seen in many, many years. Because I think it is essential that we make teaching both an attractive place for people to come, but also an attractive place for people to stay. And it's why I'm also proud that we are delivering the biggest change in 25 years in maternity pay for teachers, to recognise that where we see teachers leave the profession, sadly it is often teachers, women in their 30s in particular, who find it just too hard to juggle work and family life. But that is not just a question of maternity pay, that's also wider workload challenges around there being good flexible options for women as they return to the profession. But actually alongside that, we've seen a big increase in the number of returners. The latest figures show over 17,500 returners, which again I think shows strong progress, both in recruiting more teachers into the profession, but also keeping more teachers in the profession as well.
But fundamentally, if you pick and choose the bits that you include, you can show an increase. But the reality is, if you look over the last 2 years since you've been in role, the number of teachers have decreased significantly, so around 2,300. And in the last year alone, we've had a reduction of 1,900 full-time equivalent teachers.
Because sadly, we need fewer teachers in primary school given the falling role challenges that we see, but we have seen more teachers in the places we need them most, including a strong story to tell around initial teacher training running alongside the numbers in the profession. Just to take a few examples, in maths we've seen an 18% increase in entrance to initial teacher training, physics 37%, overall in STEM 22%. Those are the areas where I know many schools for a long time have struggled, not just to have teachers within the classroom, but to have those subject specialists able to provide the highest quality of education to young people in the area, in the subject area that they really know best. That is still a challenge in parts of the country where, whilst they may be able to recruit science teachers, they might not be able to find the physics specialists. So making progress around initial teacher training is important alongside retaining teachers. But I am proud of the progress that we've made so far against the target, which is in line with the commitments I previously gave to this committee, but also in line with the manifesto commitment that we set out, with the clear rationale that the biggest difference to a child's education comes of high quality teaching.
But would you accept that it was somewhat confusing when you launched that pledge? You launched it from a primary school, and a lot of the government websites talk about school readiness and those early years. To anyone listening to what you were saying, we thought you were including primary schools. Maybe that could have been communicated better. Would the Secretary of State accept that?
Well, what we said in the manifesto is Labour will recruit an additional 6,500 new expert teachers. We will get more teachers into shortage subjects, support areas that face recruitment challenges and tackle retention issues. Sadly, we don't face recruitment challenges in the same way in primary as we do elsewhere because of the falling roles that we face. I think what we have delivered is entirely consistent with the manifesto commitment that we made, and I'm delighted that more people are recognising that teaching is a great place to be.
So is the 2,900 reduction in primary all down to falling birth rates?
Well, we've seen, I forget what, it's tens of thousands of children that we've seen in terms of the overall drop in pupil numbers.
Yeah, so we we've seen pupil-teacher ratios in primary coming down. So yes. And the other thing I would say is we still look at, set and project, for example, the number of postgraduate ITT entrants that we need in primary in order to make sure that we're getting the numbers that we need. We've surpassed the PG ITT target for primary this year. We've met 128% of it. So it's not in the absolute numbers we need are coming down because the pupil numbers are coming down, but we are still making sure that we're recruiting enough teachers to replace the ones that are leaving and keep those pupil-teacher ratios flat or falling.
Okay, moving on to tax, if Chair, do I have time?
Of course.
Okay. So my colleague Neil Shasti-Hurst asked a written parliamentary question recently which I felt didn't get an adequate answer, so I was going to take the opportunity to ask you both this today. How much of the 1.8 billion funds raised from the VAT on school fees was directly spent on teaching staff in the state sector? I'm afraid I don't have the answer that was provided to you in front of me, but I'll do my best to answer that question. We made a commitment to end tax breaks for private schools in a manifesto. That is something that we said ahead of time would happen, and we have delivered. It will raise more than £1.8 billion a year by 29-30, but we are already investing more every year into schools than that number will raise by the end of the Parliament, although we are raising more than was originally forecast as set out in the autumn budget. So we are raising more through that, which does allow us to invest more in schools. Of course, the vast majority of what schools spend will go on staffing costs. The overwhelming proportion of their spend, it will vary slightly between schools, but the overwhelming proportion will be on staffing costs. And there is significant investment in the core schools budget, which we've already increased by £3.7 billion in 25-26 compared to 24-25. And if you consider that it is by the end of the Parliament that we will raise £1.8 billion a year through ending the tax breaks private schools enjoy, we are already surpassing what we committed to investing. So, Julie Robinson, the Chief Executive of the Independent Schools Council, has said that 105 independent schools have closed since this policy was introduced, and she expects more to close. 1/5 of those were in London and surrounding areas, and it appears that pupil numbers in independent schools have come down by 33,000. Do you recognise the negative impact on those children and local communities where those schools are closing? These are decisions that individual schools will need to consider. They are independent. They can make decisions about how they budget, how they run their institutions. But private schools have been closing long since VAT was announced. And you referenced London. We talked earlier about falling pupil numbers. That is particularly acute in London. Therefore, I would expect that there is reduced demand in both state and private sector. But of course, where some private schools have closed, it is sad to say, but sometimes this does reflect long-standing financial challenges that the school may be experiencing. Sadly, sometimes poor financial management on the part of the school, and just as the case in the state sector, private schools will also have to consider their options around funding, around investment, around viability. And actually, we've seen more private schools open than close in the last year, contrary to some of what is pushed about in the newspapers. So we're seeing 33,000 more pupils come into the state sector, and many of those will be with SEND. Do you anticipate seeing an increase in class sizes in the state sector as a result of this? That's certainly not what we're experiencing at the moment, both in terms of the numbers but also the pupil-teacher ratios. And I think it's worth highlighting that the calculations and the analysis that underpins how much the policy will raise takes account of any questions around pupil movement. So it does already take account of that. So it net will give us £1.8 billion a year by 29-30 to invest in private schools. That money is already going in, invest in state schools. That money is already going in. And the closure rate that we've seen in non-special private schools is consistently in line with the pattern that we've seen over many, many years. I mean, private schools have choices to make about how much they choose to charge parents. Increasingly, they have made the decision to charge fees that way outstrip what parents are able to pay They are independent. If that is their choice, that is their choice. But you know, parents also have choices about how they spend their money and what they choose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you. So I'd just like to go back briefly to the teacher retention question. And obviously there are some targets you're hitting on recruitment, but as long as teachers are leaving the profession, you can keep recruiting new teachers, but you're filling a leaky bucket. And also, the more experienced teachers leaving the profession means that schools are losing that experience in their workforce. Teachers leaving the profession is at its worst among school leaders who are leaving the profession at record levels, 4 times the rate seen in 2010. And Jack Worth of the National Foundation for Educational Research warned that poor retention means that even if you do meet your 6,500 recruitment target, it's not going to reverse the effects on the quality of education that have been happening over the last decade under the Conservative government. So do you accept that the retention is as important, if not more important, than your recruitment targets in order to keep teacher numbers level?
I absolutely accept the importance of teacher retention alongside strong recruitment, and that's why, you know, I'm really pleased that teacher retention is, in terms of one of the leaving rates, is the lowest it's been for many years. I think certainly since around 2010. So a strong record in terms of teacher retention, but absolutely more to do. And I continue to work with school leaders, with those representing school leaders and teachers, to address some of the workload pressures that I know continue to endure. But we have taken the first step in 25 years as well to improve maternity pay, a doubling of maternity pay. As a first step, I appreciate that people will seek to see further improvements beyond that as well. So there is a lot that is happening to make teaching a better place, both for people to go but also for people to stay. I also believe, going to our discussion earlier around child poverty, that addressing those wider challenges that sit beyond the school gate will also make a material difference to the experience of teachers and staff as well. If they're having to spend less time supporting families in temporary accommodation, less time, you know, washing clothes when children arrive, you know, because they don't have a washing machine in their bed and breakfast accommodation, if they're not having to support so many children who are hungry because they're now eligible for free school meals, I think that will make a huge difference to the experience of teachers. I appreciate that they want to see more and faster. I understand that, and that's exactly what I'm focused on, making sure that we do. But strong numbers in terms of recruitment, strong numbers in terms of retention. Is there more to do? Of course.
It's interesting that you talk about maternity pay, because teachers now get 8 weeks maternity pay, whereas if you're a civil servant at the Department of Education, you get 26 weeks. So understandably, teachers might feel that there's a slight imbalance there. But just briefly... Sorry to jump in. Of course, we've doubled it from 4 to 8. That is a first step. I understand the case that people make around that, but that is the first change that's happened in 25 years. So I do believe it, and it's an important step forward. I appreciate that, but there's a way to go. So just briefly on the workforce pressures, 7 out of 10 school leaders report having to cut down on teaching assistants in the last year because of school budgets. And 49% have reduced their support staff. And this is adding incredibly to the workforce pressures on classroom teachers. So could you say what your department is doing to improve the situation for teaching assistants, improve retention, improve pay for teaching assistants? Because if we're going to move to a more inclusive SEND model of education, these teaching and classroom assistants are absolutely vital to the success of that shift. And if schools are losing them, then it's going to be even harder for them to meet the requirements of the new system.
So I'll just start by saying that our support staff play an incredible role within our schools. You will have spoken to many school leaders, as have I, who say their schools would not be able to run without the amazing kind of lunchtime supervisors, caretakers, teaching assistants. And that's why it was a key commitment in our manifesto that we've delivered through the Employment Rights Act to reintroduce the school support staff negotiating body, to make sure that our school support staff, for the first time in far too long, have a seat and a voice at the table. And I understand the important questions and challenges that are raised around pay, around training, around wider support. Of course, our support staff and all staff across education will be able to benefit from the big uplift in SEND training that we're rolling out, and they will be within that. I have seen how brilliant it can be when support staff in particular have the training and the supervision to deliver targeted programmes. For example, the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, allowing us to identify where children are facing speech and language challenges, stepping in early. And the highest quality will come where we don't allow support staff just to sink or swim supporting children with complex needs without the wider kind of leadership and teaching support that is needed. And that's why, where it comes to, for example, inclusion bases within schools, we intend to be very clear that support staff time must not be replacing the important work that teachers do. It should be as part of that whole school community in delivering better outcomes and better standards. And I think in terms of the numbers, obviously schools will make individual decisions around how they balance their workforce in terms of their local context and the demographics of the children within their care. But in terms of the most recent numbers, I think we saw an increase in support staff teaching.
Numbers of TAs are going up across the system.
But there could be differences across schools.
Thank you. I'll go to Darren.
Thank you. The Milburn report gives us a pretty stark warning that 1 in 6 young people could soon be out of education, out of employment, out of any kind of training whatsoever. That report and our own committee's inquiry into FE&, skills has found a system that it's fragmented, it's really difficult to navigate, it's underfunded, and if you've got really complex needs, it's almost impassable. Do you accept that the current state of post-16 is failing a significant number of our young people in this country?
I believe that our post-16 kind of providers in terms of colleges and others do a fantastic job in supporting young people, many of whom have had quite difficult and hard experiences further down the line in particular. And I'll say a bit more about Alan Milburn's interim report, which I think sets out a clear diagnosis and lots that we are considering as a department and will be considered right across government, and he will bring forward his final report. I felt what was really powerful in terms of what Alan Milburn identified was the importance of early years in determining children's futures, that children not school ready at age 4 and 5 are 3 times more likely to be NEET by the age of 16, 17. So whilst it is right that we do reform and continue to reform the post-16 landscape, and we talked earlier about qualifications, around apprenticeships, around good progression routes, there is a lot more that needs to happen long before young people ever reach that point at the age of 16 where they're at risk of falling out of education, employment or training. And what happens within our school system, what happens in early years, are some of the biggest indicators as to what will then happen post-16. So clearer pathways, qualifications reform, especially at level 2 for many young people, good routes into employment, all essential. But what I took from Alan Milburn's review, from the initial report, and certainly from the extensive discussion that I've had with him, is the importance of seeing this as a whole system, holistic approach. So not just addressing the problems that arise when young people fall out of education or don't present at college at 16, although we are doing work to make sure that doesn't happen. But at the same time, addressing the very significant numbers of young people we currently experience, over 1 million, as you know, who are not in education, employment or training. But that won't stop happening unless we address the root causes much earlier on in those young people's lives. And everything we're doing as a government, Best Start Family Hubs, child poverty, early years investment, that will deliver the long-term changes and the long-term better outcomes for young people. But then we have to deal with the reality that we find ourselves in at the moment.
I think I definitely accept that the earlier you can change life chances, the better they will be later on, of course. And we would certainly agree that the people, the workforce, the tutors, teachers, support working in that system at the moment are doing a fantastic job. But the scaffolding around them is creaking, is it not? And what are the key priorities, do you think, for fixing that, so that actually, for those within it, they stand a better chance, but certainly those that are going to be coming through with better early experiences will meet a much more a system that will serve them far better than it currently is? What are the priorities?
So I think there's the longer term reform and also responding to the here and now. So on the here and now, you will know the government's work around the youth guarantee, the extra investment that's going into further education, the work around refocusing apprenticeship starts on young people, so tilting the system back towards young people. So that work is underway. The longer term reform that over time will ensure that fewer young people do not end up in that position in the first place. And strong family support, early years education are really protective factors for young people that guard against some of those challenges that we're seeing at the moment. But there is also a need to continue to drive forward with qualifications and wider reform to vocational education. That is not to say that that is the right option for all young people, but it is an important gap that has been there for a very long time. So the discussion we had earlier around V levels, around expanding T levels, around the changes that we're making around 16 to 19 English and Maths preparation qualifications, alongside better level 2 options for young people and clearer progression routes, in addition to doing more to support young people as they reach that critical moment at the age of 16, where too many young people drop out of education never to be seen, where there is a lack of accountability and a lack of responsibility across the system to ensure that those young people move into good destinations. That is all absolutely essential if we're to deliver the step change that young people need. And I think it also connects up to where we started the session, which is around support for young people with special educational needs and disabilities as well. We know that young people who are not in education, employment or training are disproportionately more likely to be children with SEND as well.
Just wanted to add, talk about one thing on a particular policy from the skills white paper that we published in the autumn, which hasn't had a lot of attention, but I think really speaks to the point that the Milburn report makes about strengthening the sense that there's a kind of participation structure around children. So by and large, the children that are in the post-16 institutions studying don't do too badly out of the system. It's the children that drop through the cracks at 16 and aren't in them. And you can see that in the NEET rates and over time. And we said in the white paper that we were going to try and offer effectively a default place in college to any 16-year-old that didn't have another identified plan, and we've got pilots underway looking at doing that, and I think that's quite important. It was actually a suggestion that was made by David Hughes, who runs the Association of Colleges, which we picked up, and the point that he made, which I think is right, is that for a lot of young people in academic routes there's an obvious default, and if you take no action it happens to you, so you can continue to study where you are. For young people for whom that isn't the right route, actually if they take no action they fall out of the system, and we know how powerful it can be to flip those basic defaults. So again, we won't be nobody will be forced to do anything they don't want to do, but the default if you take no action will be that you will be enrolled in a college place rather than left, and we think that's potentially quite powerful. I would also say we've talked a lot about school roles in this session. The demographic bulge is currently in that 16 to 19 space, so we've got a lot of young people in the system, and I think there's also something very important about making sure that we're supporting that large group of young children as they go through the system to be able to participate.
Thank you. Serena.
Thank you. The Milburn report rightly identified that youth disengagement doesn't begin at 16, it's much before that, and also identified that pupils who were persistently absent are 4 times more likely to become NEET. So what specific steps are you taking to address persistent absence?
This has been a big focus of the work of the department right from the first day I became Secretary of State, because I was clear in opposition that we, particularly after the pandemic, although these problems were emerging long before the pandemic, that we were seeing very high and stubborn rates of persistent absenteeism. And as you say, we know the damage that causes to young people right throughout their lives, less likely to go on to good jobs, less likely to secure good GCSEs. But where that begins with, it begins with every couple of days, it then starts to add up, and then it becomes an entrenched problem. And we've done a lot of work on supporting schools to understand the data and better use the data to target interventions, including, we talked earlier about AI, including through the use of an AI tool to better track and understand What is it that might be happening on a Wednesday afternoon with year 8 that means there is a problem where you see a drop off? What is it about your year 10s and Monday morning? There are, but really down to quite granular detail, and allowing schools to consider what action they might take in response to that. And I was just this week on Monday in Birmingham speaking with primary leaders about the work to drive this further forward. We've done a lot of work on attendance conferences for school leaders, local authority leaders, trust leaders, initially at secondary, now moving into primary, to work together to embed good practice, to identify the challenge, to better understand the data, but then also to take action. Now, there is a lot that schools can do, and sometimes when they've identified that there is actually a particular issue on the Wednesday afternoon, their attendance rates can improve where they make a response around curriculum or around thinking about how they run their school day. But this is not something that schools can do alone. And it's also why the work around expanding mental health support teams will make a big difference, because we know that for some young people, being in school can be difficult if they're facing wider challenges in their lives, especially around mental health, especially if there are problems at home. And the approach on school attendance should be one of support first. We are very, very clear that's what we expect schools to do. But where those problems are more deep-seated, where they are connected to support for children with SEND or support around mental health, or where families are struggling, that is something where government should and must, and where we are stepping in to provide the extra resources and support. And by the end of 2029, all schools and colleges will be covered by a mental health support team. This year, 800,000 more young people are set to benefit from that support than the year before. Again, an area where there is more to do, but where there is significant progress, and where I think the message that we all send about the importance of school attendance really does matter. Every day in school counts, and these occasional days can add up to quite significant challenges further down the line. And again, through the data that we've been able to set out, can lead to a reduction in overall academic outcomes for young people.
I'm planning to aim to stop the session promptly at 11:45, and we've got 3 members who are still wishing to ask questions. So if I ask you just to bear that in mind as you're answering, we'll get through everybody who wants to come in, and I'm going to go back to Darren.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly on higher education, the department spending plans for 26-27 include a £230 million uplift for HE, and I quote, it's towards supporting HE priorities. What are those priorities? What's that funding going towards?
Yeah, there's more I think we'll be saying shortly on this topic. Our priorities are to make sure that overall that the higher education system is financially sustainable. Of course, universities are independent, autonomous institutions that can make decisions around how they operate, control their own budgets, but I appreciate they operate in a context where government determines, for example, the level of the tuition fee. That was a decision that I took to increase that in order to make sure that universities had that certainty where costs had increased over time, but the fee had not increased alongside that, and where the Office for Students have also been doing considerable work, including led by the new chair, Edward Peck, to strengthen the financial sustainability of the sector. We will be saying more shortly about some of those areas that you've identified.
Okay. In the meantime, obviously that uplift is very welcome. Can you put to bed any claims that there's going to be a £100 million reduction to the strategic priorities grant, because that was reduced by 108 million last year?
We'll be setting out the position on that very soon, so I'm afraid there's a limit to what I can say at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. And only other question on this was, obviously our inquiry looked at the financial solvency of universities and in particular international students. Yeah. One thing we recommended was that the Home Office become the co-owner of the government's international education strategy. Have they agreed to do that, and what's the nature of your joint working with them at the moment?
Not to my knowledge, but we do work very closely with the Home Office on making sure that we have a system that is fair for those who come and study in our country, and also fair to the country overall. And of course, international students play a critical role not just in the economic contribution they make to universities, to our society, to our local communities, but they also build those ties of friendship, those trading links, those links between our countries. And international students, I'm pleased, get a very warm welcome here, but we do work closely with Home Office on managing some of these wider questions.
So there's ad hoc ongoing work, but they're not co-owning the strategy.
So it's formally a joint strategy with Department for Business and Trade. We obviously work really closely with lots of departments on it, including the FCDO. And I mean, it's a government document. It's co-owned by the whole of government together, and we do work really positively with Home Office on international students.
I'd just push on that a little bit. So that all of the evidence that we had in our inquiry that fed into the report that you've received is that the home decision making by the Home Office is having every bit as significant an impact on the finances and the environment within which universities are operating as the other government departments that make decisions that have an impact on them, and yet it is not bound in to any formal mechanism for making it think about the impact that it's having on our universities and higher education sector in the setting of its policies. So can I ask if they've rejected joint ownership of the international student strategy, what is the mechanism by which the Home Office is held to account for the impact that it's having on universities through its policy decision making?
We do work very closely as a department with the Home Office, both at ministerial level and at official level. And colleagues across government, including in the Home Office, do recognise the importance of international students to our global impact, the friendships, the trading links that we have, but also the difference and the impact that students will make here when studying with us in this country. I do think it is right, however, that the Home Office do continue to keep under review and make changes necessary where we see challenges around non-compliance, for example, or where there are particular issues that are identified that I think would, if not addressed, undermine the wider system that we have in this country around migration. And therefore, the Home Office will do that in a way that is led by the evidence, but will also ensure that where challenges are identified, universities respond accordingly in making sure that where students are coming to study, they as institutions are upholding their responsibilities to make sure that there is not just the highest standards, but that also we don't drift into a situation where we see non-compliance, illegal migration arising, overstaying. I think it is understandable that Home Office will continue to push us to make sure that we play our role in maintaining the overall integrity of the immigration system, whilst recognising that, of course, the vast majority of people who will come to our country to study from abroad will come here for a set period of time, will have a great experience, and will return home, hopefully with lots to share in terms of those links that have been built.
And sorry, more technocratically, collective decision making and collective responsibility apply. So if the Home Office is going to do something that affects our work, they will consult, and when that decision is made, it's a government decision, not by one department. So again, there's a process for making sure that anything is discussed.
That process has left universities in an extraordinarily difficult situation where one part of their income stream that they have been incentivised to rely upon because of decisions by other departments that affect them, parts of that have been pulled from underneath them, and they are, what they tell us is that is creating an incredibly challenging situation, which is part of the overall what they would describe as a crisis in the funding for higher education at the moment. So we probably don't have time to pursue this very much more, but I would say that if the ideal framework that you're describing, Permanent Secretary, is not working from the perspective of universities terribly well at the moment.
The international students market remains incredibly strong and competitive. Yeah. We are a very, very attractive destination for students from around the world. But I would also observe that increasingly universities have become overly dependent upon international students in some cases, and that, I think, presents a challenge.
Caroline.
Thank you. Our colleagues on the Treasury Select Committee are currently conducting an inquiry into student loans, focusing on whether repayment terms are fair and proportionate, and this was prompted by the freeze in repayment threshold. The decision on the repayments appeared to be taken jointly by the Department and the Treasury. So could you explain what your relationship with the Treasury is over control on the student loan modelling and the changes in the terms and conditions?
I think you can see from the fact that ministers from both departments appeared before the committee demonstrates the the joint working that we're doing in this area. So our Minister for Skills was obviously joined by the Chief Secretary to the Treasury at the most recent session, and we will continue to take a keen interest in the work of the Treasury Select Committee and understand their recommendations as they bring that forward. Of course, we do have to take decisions across government around priorities, around how we fund wider investment, how we fund government priorities as well. And whilst the threshold has increased, it will then continue to be frozen. I appreciate the arguments that are made against that, but I also recognise that there are decisions that do have to be taken across government in terms of managing the overall priorities. But I do look forward to hearing the committee's recommendations in this area. I do recognise the challenges that the previous system presents. It was not a system that I designed. It was a system that was in operation since 2013, and therefore there are many people, many of whom not quite so young now, who are, in the world on these terms.
So it's a Treasury decision to freeze the repayment threshold, or is it a joint decision?
Well, these are decisions that are taken at fiscal events, but of course we continue to work closely with Treasury colleagues on understanding the impact of such decisions on on graduates.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess.
We know that care leavers are 38% more likely to drop out of university, and when you were last in front of our committee, you said that you were working closely with universities on year-round accommodation for young people who may not have a family home to go back to. Will you therefore extend maintenance provision so that it automatically covers all 52 weeks of the year for those students?
That's not something I can commit to now, but I will certainly take away. You will of course know that we have expanded the maximum loan available to young people leaving care to make sure that there is no question as to having to demonstrate family circumstances or some of the challenges that have arisen previously in that area, and it is an important step forward. We have done a lot of work with universities to address some of the challenges that care experienced young people will see around accommodation outside of term time, perhaps some of the wider difficulties that young people might experience depending on what has happened earlier on in their lives. And of course this sits as part of a much wider agenda across the department and across government about better support for care experienced young people, but also a system that supports fewer young people moving into the formal care system at all. And again, an area I know the committee has considered in detail around better support for fostering, for kinship care, and over time where we want to see a reduction in the number of children and young people moving into the children's social care system through the investment that we're also putting in to early help and the Families First partnership.
Thank you.
Just checking we've got time.
Yeah, briefly, yeah.
The value of maintenance loans has declined in real terms in recent years, primarily because forecast inflation has been markedly below actual inflation. As a consequence, students are taking more paid work and more likely to stay at home to study and face financial challenges. What steps are being taken to address the shortfall between the loan amount and actual living costs?
Again, this is an area where over many years we saw not just the erosion of the fee in terms of the income that generated for institutions, but also an erosion in terms of the level of maintenance loan support that was available to young people. That's not something we can correct for in terms of overcoming that wider gap rapidly, but we have taken the decision to increase maintenance loans in a way that will make a material difference to students. I'm not suggesting that is the entire answer, because in parallel, I'm also proud that we are bringing back maintenance grants for less well-off students that will also make a significant difference. A big gap that is currently within the system where other recommendations at different periods have been taken forward, but that recommendation was not taken forward, and we will be bringing back maintenance grants for students in further and higher education where that need is greatest. But I do understand the pressures that young people continue to experience. We have increased the loan, but sadly this was not something that has kept pace in recent years under previous governments.
And the two pilots for the lifelong learning entitlement showed considerably lower interest among potential students than had been expected. What evidence do you have that the lifelong learning entitlement will achieve widespread uptake?
So the lifelong learning entitlement, as you know, will represent a big change to the student finance system in England. It will launch in academic year 26-27, starting to commence from the 1st of January 2027. This is a big change that will mean that for the first time there will be a single flexible funding system covering levels 4 to 6 across further and higher education. So it will mean that people of working age, people who want to upskill, retrain throughout their working lives will have the same access to provision that young people might experience as they seek to move into university. The current system was designed for younger students, for those that might not have the same level of complexity around work and family life. This is an important part of how we will deliver on that wider ambition around boosting to 2/3 the number of young people accessing higher level study. And, you know, we continue to, you know, want to support people to have awareness of what is becoming available, because take-up, as you identify, will be critical.
Thank you very much for answering many questions from the committee this morning. We're grateful to both of you for attending. That brings our evidence session to a close for today. Order.